Hello. Have you ever had someone in your own family treat your biggest day as if it were a joke? My name is Sarah, and for as long as I can remember, my sister has known exactly how to turn my happiest moments into something small with just a few cutting words. Maybe you've been there too, smiling in public while someone close to you chips away at your confidence behind the scenes. But what happens when years of quiet strength finally meet the one moment no one can ignore? If it were you, how would you face that silence, and what would you do when the whole room suddenly stood for you? At 6 years old, Sarah Whitmore already knew her sister's laughter was sharper than any scolding. The sound came across the dinner table that winter evening, ringing above the clatter of forks and the steady hum of the evening news on the television. In the living room, Charlotte, 4 years older, never wasted a chance to turn Sarah's words into a joke. That night, it was because Sarah had corrected the state capital of New Mexico when her father stumbled over the answer. Richard had frowned at Sarah for interrupting, but Charlotte's laugh had done the real damage. It carried pride in itself. And dismissal for her sister Evelyn, their mother, noticed. She reached across the table, smoothing Sarah's hand as she served mashed potatoes. "Storms make strong birds," she whispered, words too soft for Richard to care about but just loud enough for Sarah to tuck away. Later that night, Evelyn left a small book of Emily Dickinson poems on Sarah's pillow. The child didn't understand all the lines, but she felt them, especially the ones about standing alone. Those moments became a quiet shield. Seasons in Michigan passed with long snowfalls and muddy springs. Sarah grew into a teenager who carried curiosity like other girls carried lip gloss. She asked questions, pushed boundaries, and wanted more than what their neighborhood potlucks or high school games promised. Charlotte, polished and admired, wore pearls to student council and shook hands with teachers like she were born for the stage. At home, though, her polish turned sharp. She told Sarah she was too intense, too odd, too serious for boys to like her. The comments landed like small pebbles, never fatal, always bruising. Richard reinforced the imbalance without even trying. He adored Charlotte's ability to present order and charm. When Sarah pushed back with questions, he sighed, preferring silence and results. Sarah learned quickly that love wasn't given for curiosity, it was given for compliance. Yet Evelyn continued her quiet encouragement, folding poetry, stories of strong women, and gentle advice into her daughter's hands while folding laundry. By senior year, Sarah had found her ambition, the United States Naval Academy. She announced it one evening at the kitchen table, her voice steady but her heart racing. Evelyn gasped in surprise but smiled proudly. Richard looked over his glasses and muttered about whether she was truly prepared for such a commitment. Charlotte smirked, swirling peas on her plate, and asked if Sarah planned to yell people into submission. The application was mailed, and the transcripts were prepared. Sarah counted the days until a reply. Then nothing came. Weeks passed. Confused, she retraced every step, searching her room and her folders. One evening, Evelyn discovered a sealed envelope in Charlotte's desk drawer, the transcripts, never sent. Sarah confronted her sister, who only shrugged, saying she didn't think Sarah would go through with it. For Charlotte, it was just another joke, another laugh. For Sarah, it was a fracture. Still, determination outlived betrayal. Sarah reapplied, this time tracking every document herself. The second packet arrived in the mail that spring. She opened it alone on the porch, the cold air cutting her lungs, but her hands were steady. The acceptance letter glowed under the porch light. She didn't announce it at dinner, didn't seek approval. She just circled the date on her calendar, her lips pressed into a determined line. When the day came to leave for Annapolis, Evelyn's eyes shone with tears as she hugged her youngest daughter. Richard stood nearby, expression firm, offering no more than a curt nod. Charlotte rolled her eyes as if Sarah's departure were just another inconvenience. But Sarah carried herself with quiet resolve, sliding into the old station wagon that rattled as it pulled from the driveway. She looked once more at the snow boots lined by the door, the corded phone hanging on the wall, the house that had given her both wounds and armor. On graduation night, Sarah circles her academy start date in red ink, whispering to herself, "This time, no one stops me." At Annapolis, respect didn't come with a uniform. It came after you proved you wouldn't break. The mornings began in gray light, boots striking pavement, cadets snapping into formation while whistles echoed across the yard. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her voice steady in recitations, her posture unyielding. Discipline filled every corner of the academy, but to her it wasn't the cold discipline her father once praised. She remembered his words, "Discipline without warmth is strength," and redefined it in silence. For her, strength was not hardness. It was the ability to keep going when no one expected you to last. Days blurred into weeks of drills, study, and sleepless nights. Coffee from base diners arrived in flimsy paper cups, steaming against the chill as she pored over logistics assignments while others laughed at jokes she was not invited into. She noticed the nicknames whispered behind her, Ice Box. Not because she was unfriendly, but because she never flinched. She kept her voice measured, her face calm. They pushed to see if she would snap, but she never gave them the satisfaction. After graduation, the Pacific brought new rhythms. Coronado salt air clung to her uniform, the sound of waves carrying into the training fields. Her orders placed. Her in logistics, a post many dismissed. Sergeant Danner treated her with thinly veiled disdain. Are you lost, sweetheart? He asked her first day, smirking over half-shaven stubble. Sarah ignored the bait, asking only for the clearance forms. He laughed, but she noted the errors in his logs and corrected them before the week ended. She arrived before dawn, reorganized storerooms, and redrafted chains of supply. When shipments arrived on time, it was her quiet precision that kept men alive. One by one, small acknowledgments appeared. A lieutenant no longer checked her reports 3 times. Ramos offered a nod during briefings. Torres and Hill, already hardened by tours, began calling her ma'am without a trace of irony. It was in Yemen that the silence cracked into recognition. She had been sent as part of a support element, not expected to be near fire. But the radio chatter shifted from routine to desperate in minutes. A recon team pinned down, a young SEAL bleeding badly, coordinates spilling out with static. Sarah was on the tarmac when the call came. She didn't hesitate. She strapped on gear, citing her clearance codes, and climbed aboard with Torres and Hill beside her. The desert night was a sheet of blackness, sound carried in bursts of gunfire. She crawled into grit and dust, her breath searing, dragging herself toward the downed operator. Bullets snapped overhead, but she focused only on the leg wound spurting beside her. She cinched the tourniquet tight, radioed for medevac, and shouted coordinates with a calmness that belied the chaos. Pain tore across her own shoulder as shrapnel ripped through fabric, but she didn't stop. She pulled him to the extraction point, teeth gritted, ribs throbbing with each crawl. When the helicopter lifted, she refused the stretcher. Blood smeared her uniform, pain blazing, but she forced herself upright. Step by step, she walked to the ramp, spine straight, eyes forward. Behind her, voices hushed. Then someone whispered the words that would follow her for years. Iron Wing. Sarah limps off the aircraft herself, bloodied uniform intact. Fellow SEALs whisper Iron Wing. While recovering, she sees Charlotte on TV discussing women in leadership, using Sarah's blurred photo without permission. Sarah discovered leadership wasn't about shouting orders, it was about listening when no one else would. By 2010. Norfolk had the dependable rhythms of a small town stitched to a naval heartbeat. The learning center was plain cinder block and scuffed tile, the kind of room where chalk dust floated in sunbeams and the coffee pot hissed its way to burnt. Sarah's desk carried the basics, legal pads, a jar of pens, the little book of Emily Dickinson her mother once slipped into a drawer, and a stash of protein bars she ate between sessions. She still arrived early, quietly straightening chairs before anyone else came in. When she proposed a mentorship program for young candidates, the first answer from admin was a shrug that sounded like no. Too busy, too many forms, not enough staff. She didn't argue, she resubmitted with smaller numbers, borrowed hours, and a promise to handle the paperwork herself. The approval came back stamped with a cautious yes. The first Thursday night drew only 3. Jana sat straight-backed, eyes bright and afraid of showing it. Ava Lynn kept glancing at the clock like she might sprint back to formation if Sarah wasn't careful. Tyler, a SEAL candidate with strong test scores and a mind that ran too loud, stared at his boots. Sarah didn't lecture. She asked each one what they thought ready felt like and wrote down their answers. She talked about the small things, eating when you're not hungry, sleeping when you're anxious, how to carry a failure without letting it bruise tomorrow. They left without fanfare, but they came back. Weeks folded into a modest tradition. Sarah opened with a question, listened longer than most leaders had time to, and offered practical routines: how to rehearse breathing during night runs, how to keep a pocket notebook for doubts and for wins, how to ask for help without turning it into a confession. Somewhere along the way, a joke surfaced that her office smelled like a diner: chalk, coffee, and hope. She didn't mind out on a windy Saturday in May. The town's Memorial Day parade rolled past brick storefronts and the old post office. Families waved small flags. Sarah stood near the curb with her group, explaining names etched on plaques like they were chapters everyone should know. Afterward, they ducked into a neighborhood cafe for filter coffee in paper cups. Jana slid a few crumpled bills under the saucer. Sarah topped off the tip without comment and thanked the waitress by name. Daniel Harper appeared in this season of Thursdays almost by accident, a civilian analyst on a joint project who started leaving a spare coffee on the corner of her desk. He didn't lead with stories about himself. He asked questions about leadership the way some people talk about weather: steady, interested, never prying. One afternoon he glanced at her half-eaten protein bar and said, with a small smile, that she deserved a real lunch. He took her to a modest diner with linoleum floors and a bell on the door. He held it open, ordered the turkey club, and insisted she try something that wasn't wrapped in foil. When the check arrived, he left a fair tip and a thank you written on the receipt. On the walk back, he asked, "What does a good day look like for them?" and meant Jana, Ava, and Tyler, not the metrics. "You made me believe I belonged here." Ava said it softly one night after drill when she stayed behind to stack chairs. Sarah didn't move to deflect the praise, she simply nodded and told her to keep a log of moments that proved the feeling right. Later, in the empty hallway, she let herself breathe in the quiet a little longer than usual. The note came on a gray morning, forwarded from a supervisor clearing out an account. It wasn't addressed to anyone. The text was plain, misspellings and all. "She made me feel I wasn't a mistake." Tyler's name wasn't on it, but the shape of his sentences sat like a familiar jacket. Sarah read the lines twice, then folded the paper and slid it into the front pocket of her binder, behind the first page of the mentorship plan she'd written on a Sunday afternoon. She carried it the way some people carry photographs. Daniel noticed the binder later. He didn't ask what was inside, he just set a fresh coffee near her elbow and said, "Whatever you're building, it's working." She smiled without looking up, copying dates from a whiteboard while the old clock above the door ticked toward evening. Sarah receives official orders. She will be inaugurated admiral at the National Defense Auditorium in D.C. Charlotte is listed as media coverage. The night before the inauguration, Sarah's phone buzzed with Charlotte's message, "Cute. Are they going to salute the podium too?" She stared at the screen in her hotel room, the words glowing against the dark. The cruelty felt familiar, an echo of transcripts hidden in a drawer so many years ago. Charlotte had never changed. Sarah slid the phone face down on the table, refusing to type a reply. Silence had always been her best answer. The city outside was encased in January frost. Snow clung to the curbs and the lamps threw long, sharp shadows across the sidewalks. Daniel knocked gently before stepping in, carrying his coat draped over one arm. "Breakfast tomorrow," he said simply. "No excuses." He knew she had a habit of burying nerves beneath duty, and he refused to let her begin one of the most important mornings of her career on a protein bar and black coffee. The next morning, they ducked into a small Capitol Hill diner. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside, and the smell of bacon and coffee hung in the air. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, called them "Han" as she set down mugs. Sarah ordered oatmeal, Daniel a stack of pancakes. They didn't talk about the ceremony. He asked about the weather back in Michigan, the kind of snow that stuck to boots, and she found herself describing the old station wagon that used to slide on neighborhood hills. When the check came, Daniel left a neat 20% tip and added, "You've already earned tomorrow. Nothing left to prove." Across town, Charlotte was rehearsing her commentary. Cameras tested light, and she spoke easily into the mic, rolling her eyes at the formality of military traditions. "All this standing and saluting, it's theater," she quipped, unaware the mic was still live. Her assistants laughed too loudly. To her, Sarah's moment was another stage to decorate with sarcasm. Richard arrived quietly that afternoon, checking into a hotel near the auditorium. He didn't call, didn't knock on his daughter's door. He signed the guest log with his usual precision and spent the evening sitting stiff in a lobby chair, scanning headlines without seeing them. Sarah walked past a rehearsal room that evening, pausing just long enough to hear Charlotte's hot mic laughter about officers saluting like trained dogs. She felt the sting but kept moving. Her life had been built on not letting Charlotte's words stick longer than a second. Back in her quarters, she laid out the uniform piece by piece. For stars gleamed against polished fabric. She buttoned the jacket slowly, each snap a quiet bow. Her reflection looked calm, though her pulse pressed heavy in her throat. The phone on the desk buzzed again, not Charlotte this time, but a firm voice through the line, "Admiral, they're ready for you." The auditorium doors opened, and 200 SEALs rose to their feet as one voice called, "Admiral on board." For a heartbeat, everything else, the cough of a camera, the red tally lights, the whisper of programs, fell away. The call belonged to flight decks and dusted runways, to nights when orders cut through chaos. Admiral on deck had once meant danger and duty. Here, beneath high ceilings and a sweep of flags, it carried a different weight. Chairs scraped back in a ragged chorus, boots struck the floor in unison, and the hush that followed felt almost holy. Sarah stepped over the threshold. In dress whites, metals catching the soft winter sun that slipped past the high windows. Snow outside had given up to slush. Inside, the air held the crispness of a day that had started with frost and purpose. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Presence did the speaking, chin level, shoulders set, pace measured as a metronome. Daniel sat in the front row, hands resting easy, the smallest lift at the corner of his mouth. Pride showed in him the way warmth shows in old wood, quiet, steady, without show. He stood with the others when the call rang out, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. Cameras pivoted. On a side platform, Charlotte lifted a microphone and then froze. She had been ready to narrate the pageantry, uniforms and salutes, a tidy script for a tidy segment. The room refused the script. The first ranks of SEALs snapped their hands to brows with a crispness that carried to the back wall, and the second and third ranks followed until the whole center section was a single, unwavering salute. The sound of fabric, the click of heels, the collective intake of breath, these were not television cues. They were the grammar of respect. Sarah moved down the aisle between them. She recognized faces not by name only but by scars and the way a posture speaks. A man near the center braced on a crutch. The last time she'd seen him, sand had streaked his cheeks and pain had made his voice a whisper. Now he pushed himself upright, jaw tight, and found his balance long enough to raise his hand. The crutch wobbled, two men on either side steadied him without dropping their salutes. Beyond the uniforms sat civilians in their winter best, veteran service caps, and young cadets with fresh haircuts and the kind of nerves that make palms damp. Near the aisle, a cluster of men's, Ava among them, stood with the same solemn care as the seasoned ranks. Sarah's lessons had asked little that could be measured: breathe, write things down, ask for help. Their posture returned the measure: we heard you. We're still here. The master of ceremonies began to speak and then wisely let the room finish its sentence first. The applause did not crash, it rose like a tide, respectful and even, spreading from the rear forward. Charlotte lifted her mic again and said nothing. Her practiced voice, so quick to frame, now found no angle. The director's hand chopped the air, but the moment was not hers to shape. Sarah mounted the steps, took her place at the podium. The wood felt worn and dignified under her fingers. She spoke without ornament, about work that asks more than it promises, about leaders who listen longer than they talk, about the duty to see those most people overlook. Each sentence landed cleanly, not because it was clever, but because the room already believed the life behind it. In the back row, a man in a gray suit rose a fraction of an inch and stopped, as if remembering old rules and old hurts. Richard's shoulders had carried decades of command posture, now they carried a hesitation that trembled at the edges. He looked small to Sarah from that distance, smaller than the officer who had once filled doorways at home. The pause stretched. Then, as if the decision had been there all along waiting for courage to catch up, he straightened fully and lifted his hand. The salute was not quick. It unfolded, deliberate, palm-angled, eyes wet but steady. In its path lay years of silence. In its shape, the plain language of pride. The crowd felt it, how a single gesture can pull history through a keyhole. Applause swelled again and softened, as if unwilling to trample the quiet that followed. Somewhere a heel tapped twice, then stilled. The cameras found Richard's face and then, respectfully, looked away. When the formalities ended, when the certificate was handed and the anthem faded, the room did not loosen into chatter right away. People lingered in their uprightness, as if leaving too quickly would break something fragile. Sarah stepped back from the podium and let her eyes travel over the sea of faces. Danielle's calm, Ava's shining, the wounded operator's determined. Set, a dozen others whose stories she knew by the way they stood. She took one last look toward the side platform where Charlotte stood with her mic lowered, the broadcast light still washing her cheek. Sarah looks across the hall, locks eyes with Charlotte. No words, only silence heavy with recognition. A year later, Sarah stood at the Pentagon podium, the Department of Defense medal heavy on her chest. The air inside the auditorium carried the hum of spring. Just outside the walls, cherry blossoms were finishing their bloom, their petals scattered across sidewalks and caught in car grills along the Potomac. Inside, the room smelled faintly of polished wood and floor wax, the way federal buildings always did. Families filled the seats, cadets sat in pressed uniforms, and a row of older veterans adjusted their caps with hands lined by time. Sarah took in the scene quietly, letting it sink in before she spoke. She had thought often of the salute at her inauguration, the sound of hundreds rising together, the silence before applause, the weight of eyes that saw her not as a sister to mock but as a leader who had earned her ground. That memory had carried her through late nights drafting reform policies, through the endless briefings and pushback, and even through the quiet evenings when doubt pressed harder than any battlefield. Had Daniel sat in the front row now, his expression steady, his wedding band catching the light when he folded his hands. He smiled without exaggeration, the kind of smile that anchored her rather than celebrated her. She felt its calm reach her even across the podium. Sarah began with her voice low, measured. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned when no one is watching. She paused long enough to let the words settle. She spoke about leadership as listening longer, about the unseen labor of making sure others could stand tall. She did not list her medals or victories. Instead, she told of quiet rooms where voices once went unheard, and how those rooms had become spaces where truth was finally allowed. When she finished, a wave moved through the audience. First one cadet stood, then another, until 100. Young men and women were on their feet, hands rising in salute. It was not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate. Sarah met their eyes as she returned the gesture with a nod. Steady as always, Charlotte was seated toward the middle, not at the press table, not holding a microphone. She did not smirk, did not roll her eyes. Instead, she joined the applause. Her hands came together firmly, the sound of sincerity where once there had only been mockery. Sarah didn't linger on it, but she noticed, and in its quiet way it mattered. In the corner of her vision, she caught a young cadet, a girl barely 20, her name tag reading Avery Patterson. The name alone carried history. Avery saluted with wide eyes, her chin lifted high, as if she carried the weight of generations. Sarah felt a sudden pull in her chest, recognizing that the future was already stepping forward. From the back, Richard moved. He was older now, his gait slower, but his posture still carried the dignity of command. He removed his cap as he reached the stage. For a moment, father and daughter simply regarded one another, decades of silence condensed into a pause. Then he extended his hand. "Proud of you," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. After a breath, he added, "Sorry it took so long." Sarah clasped his hand firmly. No speeches followed, no photographs staged. Just the truth, recognized at last. Without decoration, applause rose again, and then softened into conversation. As people filed out, coats over arms, programs tucked into purses. Outside, the air was mild, cherry blossom petals drifting with the breeze. The ceremony was done, but something steadier remained. That evening, Sarah and Daniel sat at their kitchen table. The medal lay on the counter, forgotten beside unopened mail and a bag of oranges. A carton of leftover Thai food steamed between them, the kind of simple dinner that felt like a reward after too much ceremony. The window was cracked open, letting in spring air tinged with the scent of grass and city dust. Daniel leaned back, chopsticks balanced in his hand. "Did it matter," he asked, "that they finally saw?" Sarah looked at him, then at the window where the evening light stretched long across the yard. She smiled, the kind of smile that belonged more to peace than to triumph. Some salutes stay longer than silence. On that spring evening, the applause had already faded, but the quiet weight of recognition lingered long after. Caroline's journey had shown that true respect is never won through titles or noise, but through years of steady presence and small acts of kindness that few notice at the time. It reminds us that when we withhold judgment and choose compassion instead, even the hardest hearts can change. Like a porch light left glowing through the night, a single act of goodness can guide others safely home. Perhaps today is a good time to look for that quiet light in your own life, and share it with someone who needs it.